commissioner that is attending virtually. That is myself, Vice Chair, acting as Chair, Commissioner Erica Thompson. And then in the room, I understand that we have Vice Chair Pouncil, Commissioner Alexander, Commissioner Routh, Commissioner Wade. Do we have Commissioner Spivak?
Yep, he just joined us.
Okay, great. And I can see the room now, so that is awesome. I think I captured everyone there. Good, okay. Everyone's very small, but I can see you. So if you have items tonight, please raise your hand loud and proud. Awesome, Commissioner Ralph, love it. That's what I like to see. Thank you. Okay, so on tonight's agenda, we have the recap 10 work session and recommendation, and then at approximately 5:30, we will have the land division code update. So with that, we'll go ahead and see if we have any items of interest from commissioners.
Commissioner Mike Alexander, for the record. I'm well-trained. Well-trained. I wanted, given the topic for discussion on the recap, I did want to just remind or alert Commission that I sit on the Port of Portland Commission, and I know clearly there will be discussion that intersects with some of their operation. The item before us is not anything that has been brought to Commission or is likely to be brought to Commission, but I did want to just make that disclosure. And if there are any concerns, then hopefully people have the opportunity to raise them.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Commissioner Alexander. Other items of interest? I see Commissioner Routh waving. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Routh, for the record, that's so much fun. I think that we should just incorporate that all the time. And I just want to share, last Friday, I had the joy of joining a panel discussion at Mount Hood Community College that was co-sponsored by the Urban League of Portland specifically on the housing production strategies that are going to come before us later this year. And it just was a reminder of how important and keenly felt a lot of the conversations that we have. So thank you.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Any other items of interest? And I'm not seeing the full dais, so give a couple, pause for a moment to see if anybody jumps in. And I am not hearing anyone, so with that, we will go ahead to Patricia for a director's report.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Thompson. Thank you. Patricia Diefendorfer for the record, Chief Planner, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So do have a couple of items to announce for the director's report this evening. First, I wanted to let you know of a new project that we're initiating. You may have heard in the news that there was a restaurant in Northeast Portland that closed due to enforcement of rules regarding odor. Commissioner Rubio's office is working with that restaurant owner, and she has also directed BDS at this time to put restaurant odor compliance cases, including this one, in abeyance. Also at her request, Director Oliveira has directed me and my team to begin a zoning code amendment project to review and revise the rules for odor in the zoning code. So this project is a priority and will be coming before the commission this year. I'm mentioning this now because we had recently had a conversation at our retreat about the work plan, and this wasn't included in the work plan, but just wanted you to know that this is now an item on the work plan for this year. As far as other updates, wanted to just put on your radar that the Lower Southeast Rising plan and project that you all made a recommendation to council on will be going to council on April 25th. And the chair, Mary Rain O'Mara, will be presenting the Planning Commission's transmittal letter on that item. Other quick updates are really more housekeeping matters. Wanted to talk about the upcoming Planning Commission schedule. There's a little bit of changes to schedule. So there will be no meeting on April 9th as there are no items for that day. On the May 14th regular meeting will instead not be a full commission meeting, but we will be providing trainings on tax increment financing districts, as you as a commission will be part of the approval and recommendation process for those TIF districts that are being considered and will be on the commission's agenda later this year. So we wanted to provide a training, and there will be time slots. Julie will be in touch with time slots in the next few weeks for those meetings, which will be on that day, May 14th. Also, May 21st, we are adding a meeting. This will be a meeting, a joint hearing of the Planning Commission and the Design Commission on the Montgomery Park Plan, which you had a briefing last summer timeframe, I believe, and now this will be coming to you as a legislative project soon. So wanted to put that on your radar, and then just the next meeting following that meeting, May 28th, will be a regular Planning Commission meeting. So please take note of those changes to the schedule, those modest changes to the schedule. And with that, I think that concludes the director's report. Happy to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. Opening it up to commissioners, are there any follow-up questions on that? And Julie, if you can help me identify any raised hands that we may have. I don't have a view of the room. There we go.
Yeah, looking good here. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you for your help as we work in the hybrid environment. I appreciate it. Next up, we have the consent agenda, which is approval of the meeting minutes from our March 12th, 2024 meeting. Is there a motion to move the consent agenda?
So moved.
Okay, I believe that was Commissioner Alexander. Is there a second?
Commissioner Routh seconds.
Commissioner Routh seconds. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. I believe the consent agenda passes. Next up, we will move on to the recap 10 work session and recommendation. And for that, we will have JP with Sandra and Shannon joining us virtually. Commissioner Alexander has already provided his disclosure for this item. Are there any other disclosures that commissioners would like to share?
Yes, I guess.
Okay, Commissioner Spivak?
Okay, check. That works. I was contacted by Bob Salinger from Clean. I don't remember the name of the organization right now. With some comments about the one of the sites, and I believe that it has been addressed with this amendment proposed by staff. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Spivak. Any others? I am not seeing any hands. So with that, JP, Sandra, Shannon, take it away.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. JP McNeil with the Bureau of Planning Sustainability. And yes, I guess already mentioned, but Shannon Buno, Senior Planner, is joining us virtually along with Sandra Wood, Principal Planner with BPS. One moment while I pull up my presentation and share my screen. So I'm sharing, there we go. Oh, and by the way, Commissioner Spivak, Willamette River Keeper. Okay, so good evening again, folks. We're here to remind you of what Recap 10, the proposal is, and to present you with another potential amendment to the proposed draft, as Commissioner Spivak mentioned. As you may recall, Recap is a regulatory improvement code amendment package. It's the 10th such package since 2002. You can think of it as a zoning code maintenance project, and there are 83, well, not counting amendments, Planning Commission amendments. There are 83 minor policy changes and technical amendments in the package. At your last meeting, just as a reminder, you voted to amend the package to add clarity to the item related to the rules for allowed uses on a conditional use site. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, we have another possible amendment for the Commission's consideration tonight. This proposal follows up on a discussion at your last meeting regarding item number 76, which is an amendment to provide an exception for some publicly owned lots from the requirement for river-dependent uses in the River Industrial Overlay Zone. Commissioners asked us, staff, to conduct some follow-up outreach with stakeholders that may have concerns with the proposal. We met with representatives of Willamette Riverkeeper and the Port of Portland to craft an amendment that with a narrow applicability that both parties can support. So the original proposal, item 76, it was originally drafted, provides an exception from the river dependent use requirement for publicly owned upland lots in the River Industrial I Overlay Zone. I'm saying that again because it's a lot and want everyone to grasp it. So key to this change was that it only applied to lands owned by a public agency. So you saw the map that's on this slide at your last meeting. It shows the publicly owned properties in the River Industrial Overlay Zone where the change as originally proposed would apply. There was concern that the proposal to apply the exception broadly to all of these publicly owned sites is a larger policy issue than is typically included with a recap. So the new amendment that we've crafted narrows the applicability of the exception to just one lot. So the site in question that triggered all of this, contains a river-dependent use on the riverfront portion of a site and has an industrial manufacturing use that is not river-dependent on an upland lot. This amendment specifically calls out that upland lot is eligible to use the exception from the river-dependent use requirement in the River Industrial Overlay Zone, and we're doing that by referencing the map that's shown on the screen. It identifies the one lot where this applies to, and that the map will be incorporated into the zoning code. This amendment makes no changes to the underlying base zone industrial use allowances, only to the overlay zone requirement for this one site related to river-dependent requirements. Both the Port and Willamette Riverkeeper expressed support for this amendment as it allows the Port to continue to use the lot for modular housing production to help address the state's housing crisis and also to provide living wage jobs whilst narrowing the applicability to just this one site. The larger question of whether and how non-river dependent uses are allowed in the River Industrial Overlay Zone is best left to a future project that can take a more comprehensive look at the issue. So that is it for the brief recap on the recap, and also, sorry about the pun. I didn't even mean to do it. Anyways, that, and then also about the amendment. So this is just what staff is proposing that you recommend to City Council to adopt the report to amend Title 33 as per the proposed draft as amended, to amend Policy 2.20 of the comp plan, and to amend the zoning map to remove special street setbacks and repeal 6 ordinances related to those special street setbacks. Just very quickly, our next steps will be for you to draft a transmittal letter and to consider what you want to include in that letter to City Council. And then we expect to publish the recommended draft to City Council in late April with an expected hearing sometime in later May. So that is it for my presentation, but I will turn it back to Commissioner Thompson for any questions or comments. Oops.
Okay, well, thank you for the recap on recap and for the explanation of the proposed amendment. We'll open it up to general discussion by commissioners. And
Eli
if,
has his hand up.
okay, thank you, Commissioner Spivak.
Well, thank you, staff, for coming up with this amendment. I was confident that there was a middle ground there, and I'm glad that staff suggested that we take a little time rather than just trying to wordsmith it at the meeting. So I would like to move that amendment that staff recommended for adoption and look forward to learning more about this issue when we get into future projects.
Okay, so we have a motion. Is there a second or additional discussion that other commissioners would like to have first?
You need a second on that motion first.
Okay, is there a second on the motion?
I second it.
Thanks.
It's JP, if you don't mind, can you put the amendment on the screen so it's clear what thank you. No, the next one.
Yeah, just a reminder, this is initial discussion and vote on the amendment itself.
Right, this is what they're voting on right now. Mhm.
Yes.
Restate that, I'm sorry, please. What are we voting on?
I just wanted to be clear that the vote right now, the motion that Commissioner Spivak made and the second are for this amendment that's on the screen currently. An amendment to item number 76.
Okay.
Is there any?
Yeah, yeah.
Or we're still in discussion, though.
Yeah,
This is
I-
Commissioner Pouncil.
Yes.
Okay.
We've had a motion and a second, but that does not preclude us from discussing the proposed amendment. So if there are other comments or questions from commissioners,
This is Commissioner Pouncil. I would like to just second Commissioner Stevac on thanking the staff for finding this middle ground. This is great. And I guess there's time for additional dialogue that goes into the letter after this, right? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and let me co-sign on comments. I was particularly creative. I admit that I had to read this about 9 times to understand where it was we were trying to get to. But when I worked my way backwards from solution through challenge, it became a little clearer. So I do appreciate it. But it also piqued my curiosity as to what the legitimate concerns were with the initial proposal as well. And so in some ways, I'm curious to sort of understand what it is that we might be able to avoid by having taken this path. So I just wanted to offer that. And I do thank the creative approach that the team took in cobbling this together.
Commissioner Lane.
Yeah, JP, just a quick question. You mentioned these other properties publicly owned would be looked at in a more detailed way if they came up for any needs along this. Would that be through the recap, or is there some other method that would be then?
I can.
Not through recap, but I'm going to turn it to Patricia to get a little bit more about future projects.
Sure. Thank you so much. Patricia Diefendorfer for the record. So you may recall from our discussion at the last meeting, we discussed the fact that there is an economic opportunities analysis that's underway currently. This is a part of the comprehensive plan. It's a foundational document of the comprehensive plan. We're required to periodically look at the projections for jobs in the future and make sure that we have the land availability to accommodate those jobs. And so in the context of the economic opportunities analysis is where we think it's probably appropriate to be looking more broadly at the issue of the river industrial zone and uses of that zone in the future, and whether, how to continue to require river-related, river-dependent, and whether there should be any flexibility in that. So I think ultimately what we're saying is that this issue will be looked at more broadly in that process.
Vice Chair Thompson, for the record, it would be helpful for me to understand if Willamette Riverkeeper, did they have specific concerns with the original proposal? And can you describe those a little bit more fully?
Did you want to, look like you wanted to, I'm not sure hopefully I can characterize this well. Their main concern was with the fact that the large industrial sites and the river-dependent use issue needs to be looked at more broadly, and that we were making a change that they weren't comfortable with. And so they were supportive of the idea of just letting that question remain open and addressed later, but still supportive of the idea that the port can continue to do this modular housing use on this site. They didn't want to get in the way of that, but they have larger concerns about how large industrial sites are being used, and environmental concerns and tree canopy. That is a larger conversation that isn't recap appropriate. I don't know if that.
That does answer it. Yeah. I mean, I guess my reticence is just that I feel like this is taking like a spot zoning approach that results in added complexity and detail to a already very complex and nuanced zoning code. It's just, I feel like that's best avoided in general, but that said, this does feel like the best place to land in this circumstance, given that there are really important activities happening on this site that we don't want to discourage or disallow. And we also have the bigger forum that is the EOA. So that's where I'm at. But I was just curious to understand if there was a reason why the original proposal was not advisable from an environmental standpoint. But I think you've answered that question as best you can. Is there other?
This is Commissioner Council, and I was wanting to ask a question from staff if there has been a request for large parcels in this area, or large sites, I should say, not parcels, but large sites in the area. And the reason why I'm asking this question is because I recall that one of the reasons was that we wanted to move slow, or that there should be more deliberation about these other sites, because there's been a history of there being a lack of large sites in the area, and that if we're going to be dividing or making maybe non-river related sites, if we're going to be dividing those sites up, then we'll be in a deficit of large sites. Am I?
Commissioner Council, yeah, Patricia Diefendorfer for the record. Maybe I could try to assist. In general, what our research and analysis for the economic opportunities analysis is that there is less availability of large sites. So that is accurate. I think as it relates to this proposal, these sites remain under common ownership, right? They will remain port properties, and it's not division of land in the normal way that when you divide land and sell it off to different property owners. It really does subdivide that land and start to make smaller and smaller parcels or sites. I think the difference here, and that's why it was limited to public agencies, to be honest, is because also ultimately these sites remain in the same ownership, and it's just about moving lot lines, literally, in order to facilitate flexibility in use. But nonetheless, with this amendment, it's being limited to this particular site. And this site will remain a single site for all intents and purposes under the ownership of the port.
Commissioner Mike Council again. I guess I was trying to why there was some other concerns for Commissioner Thompson, about, the area and these larger sites maybe becoming smaller, and that there should just be more deliberation, over those sites. But thank you.
any further discussion before we go to a vote?
We need to take a vote on that amendment first.
Yep, I'm just making sure we're good
Yep,
with
thank you.
discussion. So we can go ahead and take a vote then just on this amendment as shown here on the screen.
Great, thank you. Alexander,
Aye.
Lang,
Aye.
Council,
Aye.
Routh,
Aye.
Spivak,
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye. Okay, and with that, the amendment passes. And we can now move to vote for the full package. Is there a motion to adopt the amended version of this proposal?
Commissioner Lang, move to adopt.
All right.
Commissioner Pouncil, second.
Great, thank you. And we can now go to a vote.
Great, thanks. Alexander,
Aye.
Lang,
Aye.
Council,
Aye.
Routh,
Aye.
Spivak.
I will say this is the first involvement I had in the planning code in Portland was with recap, I think 5 or 6. It was a little while ago to change the little rule on ADU. So I'm thrilled the city is doing recaps again. I think house cleaning is a good practice, and thanks so much for the work on it. Aye.
Thompson,
Aye. And with that, the amended recap package passes unanimously. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to staff. If I think we've got, well, we're just up to 5:31 in our next agenda item. But if there are items that commissioners would like to include in the letter to council with this, let's go ahead and discuss those now.
This is Commissioner Pouncil. I just, I think that it would be, I'm not quite sure like what I would want to say precisely in a letter, but the feeling that I'm getting on this is that there be some, real deliberation and reaching out to communities maybe around these sites when we do get to a position where we need to maybe change the lot lines and have multiple uses, and that there's like plenty of public and involvement, community involvement in it, and that I think that it would be also to try to preserve some of these larger sites as much as we possibly can too, just for the sake of business and industry.
Thank you, Vice Chair Pouncil. Other thoughts? I see Commissioner Routh.
Commissioner Routh, I'd love us to memorialize in the document about the importance of tackling childcare in a future, like really, like where is the home for that conversation? Because I think we have heard it and we've heard it at the state level. And these days I can't go to a conversation about housing or zoning without someone bringing up childcare. So thank you.
Great, thank you for that point, Commissioner Routh.
Commissioner Spivak has raised his hand. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if you could see that, Vice Chair
I
Thompson.
appreciate it. Thank you, Commissioner
Thanks.
Spivak.
And a couple other items that were flagged. One is home-based businesses. That might have been more me flagging it, but that seems like worthy of follow-up, and also conditional use processes, which I know the city's already got mentioned, but that was another item where it was a little bit not minor, so not part of this project.
Can I ask for clarification on that, Commissioner Spivak? The home-based businesses, we amended the rules. Was it that you wanted to elevate that as this package includes is good proposals, or was there unfinished business in your mind that you wanted to highlight?
I feel that there's some unfinished business that would not
I
be
see.
categorized as minor. So I support the things in this project that are in that code section. But as I looked around at some other cities, I feel like Portland's home-based business code is quite restrictive. And so I think it's worth the city looking at that, especially post-COVID. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying. So far we have 4 unfinished businesses. Anything that we would want to highlight about what's in the package?
I see Commissioner Alexander.
Mike Alexander, for the record, and excuse me for not waiting. I think the comments that have been offered here in terms of other considerations might be framed around simply saying that we sought to adopt a solution that would allow this package to go forward, but it pointed out the likely intersection of this with other issues going forward. I mean, without one becoming more important than the other, it did force us to sort of step back and say, but what about, or when, or how? And I just think we need to just take advantage of the fact that it's pointed out the opportunity to have this become a part of the intersection of discussions around other policy issues that have a bearing. So maybe there's a way to frame the language without just ordering or articulating, but examples are, bang, bang, bang. So I just like the idea of saying this will come back, whether it's with this, it's economic development, it's childcare. We need to make sure that we continue to keep an eye on where the shadow of this decision might take us.
Great, thank you. And Sandra, do you feel like you have clarity on all of these comments from commissioners to take a pass at a letter?
I think so. And I think I heard it a couple of times from commissioners during our deliberations of just, I think, being, like what Commissioner Spivak was mentioning, grateful that we're back in our normal cadence of doing code maintenance and the importance of that. So that's probably going to be the beginnings, and then some of these unfinished businesses items that you brought up, if that makes sense.
Okay, that sounds great. I think we can go ahead and wrap up the recap agenda item and move next to our land division code update. We will have a briefing from Morgan Tracy, so welcome. And this is a public hearing, and Julie, just so I can get prepared on my end, I have a list of 8 testifiers. Is that accurate and complete?
Yep, that's what we have. 1 in person will go first tonight, and then we'll have the other 7 online. I see 4 of them online right now, but we'll keep you posted as they go along.
Okay, that sounds great. I'll hand it over to Morgan.
Is this on? That's better. All right. Well, good evening. Let me get this started here. It's always this moment of technology awkwardness. Well, first I wanted to mention, Commissioner Council, thanks for bringing up land divisions in the last topic. There is a nice segue to our topic for tonight. So good evening, I'm Morgan Tracy, he, him pronouns. I'm the senior planner with the code development team in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Supporting me tonight are Shannon Buno, our senior planner and code editor, who's closely involved in this project, as well as the original land division code update project 20-something years ago, and also Sandra Wood, principal planner. So I'm here to present the Land Division Code Update project. As you will learn from this briefing, there are several reasons why this project was initiated, but perhaps paramount is the city's commitment to facilitate the construction of more housing in areas that have infrastructure in place. Land divisions give people the opportunity to purchase lots in order to build more housing on them. And in single dwelling zones, land divisions are one of the only ways to unlock the full development potential of larger properties, even with the new residential infill options that are now available. Oh, come on. There we go. In this presentation, I will give you an overview of the Land Division Code Update Project, an introduction to land divisions and some relevant data, and the goals and proposals of the project more specifically. And then after this presentation and any clarifying questions and answers from the commission, we'll open for public testimony, and the commission will open the hearing for that. So last November, the City Council introduced multiple projects to reduce the cost of building new housing in Portland. One of these projects, the Land Division Code Update Project, specifically aims to remove barriers to residential land divisions. Additionally, recent state legislation requires cities offer a clear and objective standards path for approval of needed housing. And when we talk about needed housing, that really means all housing. Through amendments to the city zoning code, the project will focus on updating the regulations and streamlining the process of applying for a land division. The project included technical advisors from the various bureaus involved in land division reviews, including PBOT, BES, Water Bureau, Parks and Forestry, and Development Services. We also reached out to builders, developers, frequent applicants, and community organizations with an invitation to meet and hear more about the project, and several took us up on that, including Trees for Life, the Audubon Society, Habitat for Humanity, Welcome Home Coalition, and the East Portland Chamber of Commerce, among others. In addition to the required Measure 56 notice and standard legislative notice, we also briefed several advisory committees and met with neighborhood district groups. So this slide is just showing us where we are in the process. We've completed our discussion draft review last November and December. We're here with the commission for a few months. And when we come out of this process, with the recommendation will be at City Council in the summer of 24 with a target of October 1st, 2024 for an effective date. So as I mentioned, land divisions are one of the ways to unlock the full housing potential for larger single dwelling zone sites, and they serve several key functions. First is a real estate function to clearly define property boundaries of ownership, and an infrastructure function to ensure the lots that are created are ready and able to connect to services. And third, a planning function to manage development density, encourage good site layout and connectivity, and lessen public risks. So before we get into the project proposals, I wanted to get us all on the same page about what a land division is. These are the process where one property can be split into multiple smaller lots. Each of these lots can then be owned and developed by different people. Land divisions are often used to create new lots that housing can be built on afterwards. These land divisions can vary in complexity. For example, a land division could be used to split a property where there's an existing home, so a house can be built on the new lot. Land divisions with only a few lots are often smaller in scope and less complex to review. Large vacant property can also be divided, so these types of projects might involve building new roads, creating new utility connections, and constructing many new homes. Recent changes in state law have also created a new type of land division called middle housing land divisions. A middle housing land division allows certain types of housing units to be divided and placed onto separate lots through an expedited process. Unlike a standard land division that divides properties into smaller lots for future development, a middle housing land division is used to subdivide properties with already permitted or already existing multi-dwelling structures like duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. The purpose of a middle housing land division is to enable the units in those housing types to be sold individually on their own lots. The Land Division Code Update Project does not propose to change the requirements for middle housing land divisions, which are already a streamlined state-defined process, and we just went through the process to adopt those about 2 years ago, so we don't really need a refresh just yet. The design of a land division is reviewed to ensure it meets the requirements of the city's code, which help fulfill policy objectives like ensuring high-quality public facilities and services are available to serve future development, natural resources are protected, and public health and safety is safeguarded. The requirements for land divisions span multiple topic areas, including lot dimensions and density. We'll take a look at flood hazards when they're present, landslide hazards, utility requirements, and many other subjects. So just a little bit in land division activity data background for your consideration. Almost all of our land divisions are in residential areas. 73% of land division applications in the last 20 years were in single-dwelling residential zones, and 22% were in multi-dwelling zones, with only 5% being in commercial or industrial areas. In addition, most land divisions are smaller projects. In the last 20 years, 78% of land division applications were projects that included just 2 or 3 lots. Typically, these smaller land divisions are less complex and can provide great opportunities to create infill development. As most land divisions are in residential zones with 2 or 3 lots, this project's focus is on streamlining the process for these smaller residential land divisions. The number of land divisions has fluctuated over time, but has generally decreased since the most recent peak in 2014. As the city continues to urbanize, land that can be subdivided has become more limited. That said, while larger site land divisions are becoming rare, there are still areas in the city where additional lots can be created. More commonly, the situation that's in East Portland. Streamlining the application process will help ensure that land divisions remain a pathway to building new housing. So there are 3 categories of proposals for this project, including first, creating a set of clear and objective standards for residential land divisions, updating the city's potential landslide hazard area map, and recalibrating the standards, thresholds, and review procedures for land divisions. And over the next few slides, I'll talk about each of these in further detail. So the first key proposal is to update the city's zoning code to provide a clear and objective set of standards for land divisions. Clear and objective standards are a different way to write land use regulations that do not require any judgment from staff to determine whether or not they've been met. Clear and objective standards are well-defined requirements that often rely on measurable quantities. These might include distances, measurements of area, or percentages of a feature on a site. Although clear and objective standards often offer clarity for what will be required, they often lack the flexibility of the discretionary criteria currently used to review land divisions. There may be some circumstances where an application could not meet a clear and objective standard, but could meet the intent of the regulation through discretionary criteria. And as noted earlier, Oregon state law now requires that applicants for most residential development be given the option of using clear and objective standards. The city may still offer an alternative discretionary review criteria path. So to give that a little more context, we'll take, for example, the land suitability requirement. A discretionary criteria might state, where historic uses indicate that a hazard may exist, the applicant must show that the proposed land division will result in lots that are suitable for development. So a lot of discretion and judgment required in assessing that regulation. Alternatively, a clear and objective standard might be written as, for residential development, there are no records of the following prior uses on the site. It's sort of a yes or no question. The city uses a 2-track system for some types of reviews, like projects in the design or environmental overlays. The clear and objective standards track is a plan check. They review the plans to ensure it meets standards. If it does, the permit is issued. If it doesn't, the alternative is to go through this discretionary land use process, which requires a land use application, involves notice, a staff report, and conditions of approval. However, with land division, the way the state definition defines a land use review, they're always a land use review, whether or not the decision is made using clear and objective standards or not. So this proposal is to create what we are terming a mix and match system, which allows applicants to choose the certainty of standards or the flexibility of criteria at each set of the land division regulations as they move through that process. The second proposal is to update the city's potential landslide hazard area map. The proposed changes will replace the current map, which was adopted in 2002, with an updated version using more accurate landslide hazard mapping data from the state. The landslide hazard map highlights areas throughout the city where there is greater potential of a landslide occurring. Understanding where these areas are as part of the land division process is important so that they can be more closely evaluated by a chief technical engineer, and lots building sites can be placed in the safest part of the site. The updated landslide risk map was prepared using factors such as hillside slope, geology, and location of previous landslides. The proposed map uses this more precise data to better identify landslide risk areas. And this will ensure that the requirement for geotechnical reports only applies for land divisions in areas that have a elevated risk potential. For the new map, the city used multiple landslide datasets from the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, also affectionately known as DOGAMI. DOGAMI is the state agency that is responsible for researching geologic conditions throughout the state. The city compiled 4 different datasets to create the landslide hazard map, including potentially rapid moving landslides, the landslide inventory, deep landslide susceptibility, and shallow landslide susceptibility. With these changes, some lots were added while others were removed. All told, the changes to the map removed a net total of about 10,000 lots, while adding about 2,800. So let's take a look at an example of how this map would affect a land division. First, a potential landslide hazard area map would flag that the property has an elevated potential for a landslide. The project applicant would be required to submit a geotechnical report. The study of the property will identify the types of geologic features that could create a landslide risk on the site and their specific location.
Morgan, can I have a quick question? Is the geotech report already required, or is that new with this project?
It already is a requirement. So
What I thought, thanks.
Yeah, I guess the 2 changes really are the locations, the lots that are being identified for that report, and as part of that first proposal, we're creating a set of standards to augment how that information is reviewed. So in this case, the layout of the land division can then be designed around those identified landslide hazards. So instead of creating a lot with no suitable place to build, as shown in the far right image, the new lots can be designed around the landslide risk area. The third proposal includes a number of changes to recalibrate standards, thresholds, and review procedures. These new thresholds will help clarify when regulations do not apply to smaller projects to streamline their review. Other regulations are proposed to be removed from the land division requirements. The regulations that are being removed have been found to be ineffective or unnecessary to meet the city's planning goals. The first change is to allow applicants to choose a phased land division process. So these are very large land divisions that are going to be completed in multiple stages. This is for applications when proposing more than 40 lots, as opposed to the current standard that only allows this to happen when a minimum required density of 40 lots is reached. The next is to clarify when required recreation areas are required. So these are things like small pocket parks. In response to middle housing allowances that allow fourplexes on lots. So again, the current threshold is 40 units. So with middle housing, that could mean a land division as small as 10 lots. So we're changing that to be more consistent with the original intent of those larger land division areas for 40 lots. Also, the requirement for traffic impact study is being aligned with developments with similar traffic impacts like larger apartment buildings to focus those studies on the types of developments that have greater potential impacts and may require measures to mitigate for those impacts. 2 chapters are being removed. The first is the requirement for a sign-off from the David Douglas School District. This requirement adds time and extra process to an application, but does not meaningfully change the outcome. The second is the solar lot orientation requirements. As I noted, most land divisions are smaller, 2 to 3 lot partitions that make it impractical to comply with these standards. Additionally, when we looked at past land division cases, in about 1/3 of the cases, the solar requirements were superseded by other requirements like density, lot dimensions, or tree preservation. And speaking of tree preservation, the current land division rules apply a combination of numeric standards supplemented by discretionary criteria. So right now it's kind of it's both of those things in combination. The criteria seek to maximize preservation of the best, healthiest trees on the site. So even when the numerical targets are being met, the review may result in different trees being prioritized for preservation. The proposal is to separate the standards from the criteria to satisfy the requirements of the state law so that an applicant can choose to meet one or the other. To offset for the lack of discretion to prioritize higher quality trees, the standards are being proposed to be increased slightly to obtain a higher quantity of trees. We examined cases over the last 5 years and found that preserved tree diameter nearly always exceeded current standards. Out of 220 cases, 30 did not meet the current standards, and only 10 additional cases would not have met the proposed standards. The result for these cases was an average additional tree mitigation of cost of about $900 per lot, assuming that the applicant did not adjust their tree plan to preserve any additional trees. We are proposing to reduce the review procedure for type 2 and 3 lot partitions that involve environmental review. So currently, these cases are a type 3 procedure with required pre-app and public hearing. And the cost savings for reducing this process is about $14,000. And finally, you're getting close. The project will simplify the process for separating existing lots and multi-dwelling zones into separate development sites. And currently, this is a challenging process that can incentivize demolishing existing development. The proposed changes simplify the process and enable more residential development to occur. The project will also bring all of the single-dwelling lot regulations for land divisions into one chapter. There are very few distinctions now between the R2.5 zone and the other single-dwelling zone rules, so a separate chapter is no longer needed. And lastly, the project will also change the application submittal requirements, ensuring that the code reflects current city practice and allows for electronic application submittals. So after the commission hears testimony from the public and deliberates on potential changes during a future work session, BPS staff will ultimately be asking the Planning Commission to recommend to City Council that they adopt the Planning Commission's report and commentary, amend Title 33, and repeal the 2002 potential landslide hazard map. And with that, I will open up for questions. However, for the folks at home that may be watching and may have received one of these Measure 56 notices in the mail, if you have questions about that notice, you can contact me, Morgan Tracy, at 503-823-2041 or at the Land Division Code Update at portlandoregon.gov. Just putting a little plug in there for our Land Division hotline. All right. With that, any questions?
All right, thank you for that presentation, Morgan. We will go to commissioners for any clarifying questions. We will also have time after public testimony for more of a round robin to get into discussion in a little bit more detail then.
I have a clarifying question. Commissioner Pouncil here. I think it was slide 32 that was about the trees there. I was just wondering if you could, could you explain that again for me?
You bet. There's a lot packed in that presentation.
Yeah.
Happy to give a little more detail.
Morgan, maybe it'd be helpful if you put the slide back up. The one
I'm
in
seeing it.
particular?
It's up on my screen. There we go.
Okay.
Magic.
Okay.
Thanks.
For the screens within the room, I think it was not showing.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Appreciate that. Commissioner Pouncil, as I mentioned, the land division regulations, there are a number of chapters that apply between, include landslide hazards, tree regulations, lot dimensions, all those different requirements. The tree preservation requirement currently leverages that land use review process by applying sort of a numerical target. So an applicant with a land division site can meet any one of these options to show that they're preserving the requisite number of trees on a site. So it could be focus on the 20-inch and larger trees and preserving a certain number of those trees in combination with a certain amount of tree diameter on the site. So it's sort of this numerical threshold that has to be met. Currently, that's supplemented by this discretionary criteria that says we are looking not just at the numbers and size of the trees, but we also are looking at the functions that they provide on the site. And it can vary from site to site. Sometimes it's about better wind breaks or slope stability or preserving environmental corridors more intact, like keeping a cluster of trees versus trees spread throughout the site. So that discretion allows the city and staff to emphasize other trees for preservation under the current rules. With the state requirement that residential development be offered a clear and objective path, we had to divorce those two things and rely on either clear and objective standards or this discretionary criteria. So an applicant now has the option of choosing one or the other, but they don't have to meet both. So there's more clarity, more certainty for the applicant, but the trade-off for that through a standards track is that we lose the ability to say, that's a good effort on the number, but we actually think these other trees are more important. So to offset that, what we're proposing is to bump up the number of required trees to be preserved, this percentage threshold that's changed the highlights in that slide, to bump those up to basically cast the net a little wider to capture more trees under that clear and objective path as possible.
And just a clarifying question. So this is the state requirement to choose one or the other.
Yep, about 2 or 3 years ago, I'm losing track of the date, the state passed some legislation that said if you are reviewing residential development for needed housing, and the interpretation of needed housing is broadened since that was originally adopted. Needed housing just applies to housing development, basically, in the city. You must offer applicants a clear and objective standards path. You can allow for discretionary criteria and offer that as an alternative, but the applicant must retain the ability to just apply standards.
Thank you.
Commissioner Alexander, for the record. Well, again, are you able to go back? And I wish that I would paid attention to the exact slide, but maybe around 15 or 16, it showed the rate and the frequency historically over time of land division activity. Kind of a bar graph. There we go. I'm curious, and this, maybe you can offer just some context. 2005, that period from 3 to 5, we just saw heightened activity. What drove that? And geographically, is there a sense of where it happened? Is there a sense of why it happened? Was this a precursor to Airbnb or ADUs? I'm just curious as to what sort of drove this, and if we learned anything in terms of ways in which this activity began to address other issues we had, affordable housing, or, I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense, what, in service to what?
So, well, lots of questions in there. Let me try to start from the top and work through those. I think it's important to note, so in 2002 was when the land division code, the first land division code update project was adopted, which took all the regulations from a different title and incorporated them into the zoning code. And as part of that multi-year project, there were a lot of changes that were wrapped into those amendments, which kind of pushed. It's kind of like when the affordable housing, the inclusionary housing requirement went into effect for 20-unit buildings. There was a big peak of development just in advance of those new rules coming into effect. So if we extended this graph out a couple of years before that, you'd see another big peak in 2002. That big push sort of suppressed the number of applications that were coming in 2002, and then it kind of went back up to normal and then dropped off again. So that's a little bit of what that mountain peak is showing. 2009 to 2011, there's a housing, the housing bubble, the recession happened in there, so that slowed activity down. I think you could probably flatten that line out, taking those sort of influences out of the equation, and you'd see just sort of a more gradual decline in frequency of land division applications. Beyond that, this map is showing sort of those potential land division sites are starting to dry up as we continue to urbanize the city. Those opportunities for further land divisions are becoming more and more rare. And the large land division cases like Hawthorne Ridge or, well, there's one pending, sort of pre-pending in Southwest, the Alpenrose site. It's kind of the last site in Southwest that has real potential for doing a large type of land division. So what you're seeing more often are smaller infill, 2 and 3 lot partitions, and even more recently, there was this, what's called the lot confirmation process, where there are pre-existing platted lots out there that are under a single ownership currently. Your tax account includes multiple platted lots, but your house sits on, 2 or 3 of these historic platted lots. This lot confirmation process is it basically acknowledges the existence of those underlying lot lines and allows those platted lots to be eligible for development without going through this land division process. It's a much faster, cheaper, easier process to go through. So there was sort of a discovery of all those platted lots. You've probably seen those narrow 15-foot wide homes being built on 25-foot wide lots. That was kind of an evolution of the lot confirmation process. So there was a drift in the development community from doing land divisions, which is sort of a intensive and expensive and time-consuming process, to find those opportunities for lot confirmations. So that's another part of a little bit what's driving those down. And now we have the advent of middle housing land divisions. So we're seeing a lot of the activity sort of drift towards doing fourplexes or triplexes on a lot and going through that middle housing land division process, because it's also pretty streamlined process.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And with that, I'm going to propose that we go ahead and move on to public testimony, and then we can continue commissioner discussion after that. Last thing before we do public testimony, should have done this at the top of the item. Are there any disclosures from commissioners? I am not seeing any hands. So first up, we have testimony from David Patterson in person, and then just to queue up some of the folks online, that will be followed by Jill Crank and Sandra Williams.
Great. And Erica, Mr. Patterson is here in person. He has passed out. We have hard copies for those commissioners in person today at your seats. Mr. Patterson, do you want to introduce yourself, and then I'm happy to read this.
Is the microphone on?
Yes.
Hi, I'm David Patterson. My property is 6904 North John Avenue in St. John's, Portland, right near the St. John's Bridge and Cathedral Park area. I asked the young lady if she would read my statement. I do have a eye problem, and it's hard for me to read. Excuse that, please.
Of course.
Yeah, for sure. So for those of you online who don't have this in your hands or at your tables, I will read this on behalf of Dave Patterson. I've been a resident of Portland, Oregon and St. John's for 76 years. My family has lived in St. John's continually from the 1950s to present.
1850.
Sorry, 1850s. Thank you. I would like to use my 3-minute allotment to address a couple related issues. First, a generic-looking pre-sorted flyer dated February 20th, 2024 was received in my mail just a few days ago. Only after careful reading, I realized it was to inform me that my property was going to be added to a slope hazard area, but states in highlighted printed the additional requirements only for land divisions and will only apply when a property owner seeks to divide their property. As a property owner, that seems to be a soothing statement, realizing later the consequences to myself and fellow property owners are huge. And only to realize the deadline for response to this generic-looking pre-sorted flyer is today, March 25th at 4 p.m. Just some of the basic requirements for homeowners who are looking forward to selling their property would be required to obtain a geotech report, which alone is financially devastating, not even counting how costly the remedy of the geotech report would be, City of Portland permits, fees, etc., and the chronic anxiety starting now. Second, I'd like to focus on specific properties located in St. John's on North Edison that are all located on blocks 8305 through 8505, and now are depicted on the landslide hazard map. Many of these residences cannot access Edison Street that fronts their property due to the steepness of the hillside. They must enter from the backside of their property by way of Willamette Boulevard. Many of these residents do not use Edison Street at all, but we're happy to see the blacktop maintenance that was put off for decades had finally been completed. But in addition to just having the blacktop maintenance done, the City of Portland Transportation Department completely removed the existing road and sidewalks by digging out undisturbed soil at the base of our slopes, now what is now referred to as a hazardous landslide area. Also, while doing this blacktop maintenance, they put in hundreds of feet of additional road, curbs, and sidewalks for the City of Portland's community garden located at the top of their main sewer line. Apparently, the City of Portland didn't have to pay anything, but each of us property owners along Edison Street is dealing with the city liens department, charging us in excess of $1,000 per foot Edison Street frontage of our property. Many attempts over several months have been made to bring this to light, timely filing letters, emails, and by phone calls. Some of you may not realize many grievances are ignored or just waited out, forcing a grievance to be addressed by legal means. Please address this injustice. It's your job.
Thank you for that testimony, David. Next, we will go to Jill Crank, Sandra Williams, and Michael Selker. And a reminder to testifiers, each person will have 3
Did
minutes.
that use up my 3 minutes? Excuse me.
Yes, it was.
Got the full 3. Thank you.
Okay, and Erica, it looks like Jill Crank is not with us. Sandra Williams and Michael Selker appear to be seated together from wherever they're joining us. So I will start a timer for 3 minutes. And Sandra, we have you going first, so you'll see the clock, hopefully. And when your 3 minutes is up, we'll switch over to Michael then.
I really don't have that much to say. I was grateful to get the information that we can call and ask questions of Morgan Tracy, because I have many, and I did take pictures, screenshots as he was going through his presentation. My main point is that we've lived in our home for about 20 years, and it's a home that was built in 1902, so it's 122 years old. And the little portion of slide area that's shown on the map, I don't know how accurate those are, but it is so minuscule, and is so far forward on our lot. It would be certainly within any setback.
It looked like it was close to the sidewalk.
Yeah, it looks like it's right in front, just a little corner. So is there any determination if there's a percentage of slide risk that will make us have to go through this geotechnical? Because I'd hate to have to spend a lot of money on something that is never going to be buildable, never would be buildable, and unless we tear down our house, which we're not about to do, and I don't think anyone else would, because it's an historic property. In fact, was among the houses featured at the Pittock block, or the Pittock Mansion, as an Eliza Barkus home. So it has architectural significance. In other words, it won't be torn down to put in 4 lots or 2 duplex or anything. So is there a percentage that you know of that will affect who has to take this extra step of geotechnical work? Does that make sense? So that's my question. I don't know if you're answering questions or if I should just go ahead and contact Morgan Tracy with the questions that I have about the intent of the property, the landslide risk. We also own the property next door and the duplex on it, and we are looking at doing a division to possibly put an extra lot there. But that piece of property isn't affected by the slide area if it does the partition and the lot line adjustment that we have in mind.
Yes,
I would recommend that the speaker, Vice Chair Thompson, I'm not sure if you were going to respond. I just wanted to make sure to let the speakers know that you should, in fact, contact Morgan Tracy, the planner, for individual sites, questions related to individual sites such as yours.
Okay, and that's the extent. My husband and I are just here for information today, and really appreciate the amount of detail of his presentation. So thank you.
Of course, thank you. Michael, did you have anything that you would like to add in your allotted time?
No, if you had a copy of the map that you could see it, I don't know, can you see the map that got sent to us or not?
We do not have that up at our fingertips currently, no.
Okay, so it sounds like we should be dealing with Tracy then.
Mr.
Yes,
Tracy.
that's correct.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I mean, it's already so complicated to work with the city of Portland to do any kind of, divisions. I kind of made the comment to Michael when I saw the drop off and the number of land divisions. It's probably because it takes so long now to get anything done with city of Portland, but this is just an added burden for us at this point as senior citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra and Michael, for your testimony. We're going to be going next to Kyle, I believe it's Weichert, Stephen Lamb, and then Caitlin Weekly. Do we have Kyle?
Yes, Kyle should be with us. I'm just getting him. He should be in this room now. Yeah.
Oh, I see him.
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
great. Thanks, Kyle.
Okay, great. I represent the ownership behind Plaza 205. That's the shopping center that's currently going under development for a new grocer tenant. So number one, I just want to say we're excited to be working with the city. Everything's going well. Now that I've listened to the presentation, by the way, that was a really great presentation. So thank you for that. And just want to go on the record to say it all sounds great, and we'll be following up with Mr. Tracy if we have any other questions. So appreciate the time. Thank you for the presentation, and we look forward to continue working with you guys. So thank you. That's it.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, Kyle. Next up, we are going to have Stephen, and I don't see Stephen in the room yet.
Yeah, I don't see him in the attendees list either. So it looks like the next person who is here with us is Caitlin Weekly, and I believe Caitlin will be the last person looking at who's showing up online.
Okay. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you. I'll just kind of continue the trend here. My name is Caitlin Weekly. I'm the pastor at the Mount Tabor Seventh-day Adventist Church in the Mount Tabor neighborhood. And I really was just here to kind of collect information after we got the mailing that went out. So just wanted to give a thank you to Mr. Tracy for all the information that he provided. Yeah, happy to forfeit the rest of my time. That was a really, really great presentation. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay. Julie, can you confirm that we don't have any other testifiers with us?
Yep, let me just double check. That is correct.
Okay. Well, with that, we can go ahead and close the oral testimony for the Land Division Code Update Project. We have also received written testimony, and Sandra, I know there was some discussion of whether or not to leave that record open or to also close the written testimony today. Can you provide your recommendation to the commission on that?
It seems like we can close the written testimony today. And I guess I'm recommending that because few people, the concern was, commissioners, just to get you up to speed, is that if we had a lot of testifiers today, or people who maybe even showed up in the room and wanting to testify because they received a Measure 56 notice and hadn't been able to have a conversation with Morgan yet about their landslide hazard area. And reminder, what that requires is just that they get a geotech report from an engineer when they're doing a land division, in the event they're doing a land division. So, so there's an easy remedy for that. So given that there weren't very many people who were here asking those types of questions, and I think Morgan will be able to easily answer those questions. So I think we're okay to close the written testimony if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, I will go ahead and open it up to commissioners to see if there are any concerns with closing written testimony in addition to oral today. And I am not seeing any hands, so we can go ahead and fully close testimony and go to commissioner questions and just general discussion. I see Commissioner Lang. Thank you for all these fun moves in the room.
Wade Lang, for the record. All the testimony I wrote, the lion's share of it was around the landslide issues. And you mentioned in your slides that it was last analyzed in 2022. And since then, with this new analysis, some were taken off, some were put on. What changed? What was there criteria change, development change? What caused some to disappear and some suddenly to be on?
It's a great question. I've learned a lot along the way about landslide hazards. So the last map was adopted in 2002, but it was the result of the storm events in 1996. So when there was a number of landslides that were occurring at that time, there was recognition of the importance of paying attention to this, and so that's the impetus of that initial map. At the time, we didn't have the same sorts of tools we have today, like LiDAR. So a lot of the properties that were mapped initially received that hazard designation just by virtue of being over a 20% slope. So the more recent maps combine LiDAR and soil information, and a level of risk associated with the combination of those two things together to assign sort of data points that then inform what this overall map looks like. So the science of identifying landslides has changed a bit. The tools have changed over those 20 years. And really, this is the consequence of the state updating their data. More recently, 2018 was the last major revision of the state landslide data.
So the other piece of that then, and a lot of them raised the question about insurance and having their property now designated as a hazardous landslide area. Was there any investigation of the impacts of that to individual property owners and what that might do?
Yeah, so this similar question came up when we were having the conversation around wildfire hazards. And you probably have heard the discussion at the state level about the revisions of the wildfire hazard map. The city's maps, in terms of wildfire hazard, landslide hazard, or any number of other identified hazards, are different than the insurance company's maps, and they're different than the state maps. The insurance companies may use state data to develop their risk, I don't know the term, acuitaries? What's it? Yeah, I think that's right. They might look at the state data for that, but when we were having the conversations around wildfire hazards, when we contacted the insurance companies, part of the challenge of answering this question is every insurance company handles things differently, but the insurance companies that we did contact at that time weren't looking at city data to inform them about potential risks that would impact insurance rates. That's more of they have their own risk managers that develop their own data for that. So the adoption of this map, the fact that we have a landslide hazard map that's specific to land divisions, the other thing to sort of keep in mind is it's very specific to the type of development that we're talking about, which is dividing property. So the kinds of information that we're incorporating into this map are for very specific use. You might use different data for a different type of use, like the building permit is going to look at a different set of circumstances around landslides to determine what the risk is there than what this data is. The information we used to create the constrained sites overlay for middle housing was a subset and a variation of landslide data, but wasn't the same exact data. So it would be difficult, if not risky, for an insurance company to just grab this data without knowing its basis and trying to apply it to a risk assessment for property insurance reasons, because it's not, they'd have to develop what that nexus, what the rationale for that was. if that answers, but probably doesn't answer the question.
Well, it does, and thank you. And I know it's very complex. I'm just concerned when you look at the world of insurance right now and what's going on, and a hurricane in Florida will affect property insurance costs in Portland because they're nationally kind of allocating based on what they're paying out, and it's not locally, it's on a national level. And it would seem to me that any opportunity for an insurance company to pinpoint an opportunity to deny insurance or to increase costs is there for the taking, just because of the dire straits that they're in with all the problems that are going on with the hazards, the storm hazards and stuff that we're experiencing. So that concerns me in all of this, that individual property owners through this new analysis might get punished financially for something that they've lived on a site for so long, and suddenly they get a big bill.
I understand that, and I guess going back to the initial point, this is not a new map per se. It's using existing maps that the state has already developed. So if there was a risk of that happening from sort of the insurance angle, the maps already exist. And so we're kind of using those tools and adapting them for our purposes in our land division regulations. But certainly the Measure 56 notice that goes out with a one-sentence line doesn't give a whole lot of opportunity to explain all of that.
Other questions? Commissioner Spivak?
Thank you. I had a couple questions. On the illustration you had of a map with a hazard area on one corner, it seems like the more likely situation might be that the hazard covers the whole property. In that situation, does this proposed code is it different from what was before?
Not substantively. So again, the change with the map is just flagging which properties do or do not require additional study through a geotech report. The underlying criteria remain the same. So the geotech report, the burden on the geotech engineer is to identify the safest parts of the site that are the least risky of creating slope instability. So you may see on the map it blankets the entire property. The geotech report is going to determine which areas are the safest and what types of mitigation might be necessary to stabilize the slope if you're going to develop on parts of that site.
Does the code I routinely have to get geotech reports required by my lender for flat boring sites. And I'm just wondering whether, what you described, does the code provide any guidance on what that geotech scope needs to be?
In the application submittal requirements, we expanded on the scope of that report, but also left it open. So there may be cases, and you heard some of this in the testimony, where it's a small little tiny part of the site is flagged with landslide potential. You don't need a full depth analysis. You don't need to do soil boring and cross-sectional studies to figure out the risk associated with the steep drop off on one corner of the site. So the submittal requirements enable the geotech to provide the information that's required and then explain why they didn't provide the rest, if that's the situation that exists on that site.
I've got a couple others. One is just maybe when we get to the next meeting, it might be helpful to give us some guidance on how to evaluate these concerns about the map, because they seem to feel some of them are in the category of insurance, as you mentioned, and of course we can't control where the insurance companies look to for their maps. I think Morgan's made the case that they probably look at the original maps, not Portland zoning code. We don't know that for sure, but the other are people who feel like their property is not really hazardous.
Yeah.
So I'm just hoping that we'll get some. I'm wondering if in some projects you've given us some site-specific feedback to see whether the ground sourcing of information from our public outreach reveals places where LiDAR wasn't right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've actually got a number of additional slides on the slide deck, but I figured the 40 slides was probably good for today. We can get a little deeper in the work session. I can walk you through. There was an interesting adaptation we had to do with some of the data to kind of hone in those sites and kind of reduce the areas where it seems a little less sensical for that risk to pop up.
Okay. My last little, just a comment is in my neighborhood in Coley, it seems like the cottage cluster has usurped, as you mentioned, land divisions. I mean, there's 3 larger sites. They're all doing cottage clusters. And and actually one of your slides was a picture of one of my projects where I looked at doing a land division and didn't because of the timeline associated with it. And so just sort of curious whether cottage cluster is the new way people do stuff, because now with large site, you have a by right way of doing multiple homes on it. And then the other little side question is, you had to make a recommendation on how far to go with the clear and objective path in terms of numbers. It looks like it's up to 3 lots. Is that the?
No, not necessarily. So well, it's to your first point about cottage clusters, and move that out of the way. Yes, we are seeing a lot of cottage clusters and middle housing land division and cottage clusters. And actually we're seeing the replatting process, the land division process in reverse, consolidate lots to create sites for cottage clusters, which is an interesting turn of events. In terms of the threshold for where the standards apply, it's a little bit, it fluctuates. So it's sort of related to the topic at hand. So for instance, the standards for traffic impact analysis is roughly 10 lots or fewer. You can use standards. I mean, there are ways to meet the standards with larger land divisions. It gets tougher to do that. For landslide hazards, to meet the standards, we're trying to limit that risk to the maximum amount we can. So that's a 2-lot partition in a single dwelling residential zone. You can still do criteria as exists today, but for the standards path, for that, it's a 2-lot partition. So there's a lot of variability depending on what the actual topic is.
Great. Okay. Well, I obviously have not read it yet. Thank you.
Morgan, I had a similar question to Eli, and I guess my understanding is that this is more changing when in the process folks would be required to obtain a geotechnical report, but that it's not necessarily, in most instances, a new requirement altogether if you are in fact planning to develop the site and build something there, because wouldn't you ultimately be required to obtain a geotech report then anyways?
So again, the answer is a little more nuanced. If you're applying for a land division and your site is identified on the map, the geotech report is required with the land division application. You could have a site that is not on the land division landslide hazard map, like I'm assuming Eli's flat and boring sites are not going to be on the land division landslide hazard map. There may be other conditions that the site development section is looking at that triggers the need for a geotech report. It could be things like unengineered fill might be present, or a decommissioned tank, or something. Some other reason is as part of that building permit process is requiring a geotech report. Some sites have very deep depth to bedrock, and if you're building a very large building, you're going to be expected to provide geotech engineering for that foundation design, irrespective of the whole landslide question. So it's a little bit, in terms of when a geotech report is required, it varies a little bit.
And irrespective of having a land division application too, right, Morgan?
Correct, yeah.
You could be coming in just for development, like Commissioner Thompson was saying, and need to provide a geotech report. I remember, right, regardless of that. And obviously, the purpose of the geotech report is for an engineer to take a look at the site and establish which areas have the soil that can support the foundations for buildings. Or what we try to do with the land division is, like in Morgan's example slide, is to make sure that the lots themselves will be out of the area where the houses could be put in harm's way.
Other questions from commissioners? I see Commissioner Rao.
Commissioner Routh, for the record, and a couple of questions, if I may. And I know we've been talking about the map a lot. To Eli's earlier, I would just want to clarify, are those maps, is that a new map, or is that a new map to landowners. Do you know what I mean?
What, so?
Like, is it new? Like, this is not new, but it's new to me.
Can I try to clarify, Maureen, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Patricia Diefendorfer. So my understanding is landslide maps have existed, right? And this is representing updated technology where we have more refined information. And so it's just pinpointing to a greater degree of accuracy where landslide concerns may exist. And so that's why some lots, there's a net decrease in overall area that's affected by landslide. But some lots came out and some lots newly came in.
So it's new information on the map. So it's analogous to the E zone and P zone is what I'm thinking of.
But it's, right, it's just based on more refined information.
That's
I think
right.
that's
Right.
true for the E-zone example as well, for example.
Right. So that's what you were, Commissioner Spivak, referring to when you were talking about site-specific visits?
Yeah, I was wondering if someone says, actually, that's just a retaining wall, or that's actually, like, if they're, what I'm wondering is, or will we have information based on testifiers who say that, look, you guys did the new map analysis, but it just doesn't match my situation? Will we get information to help evaluate that?
Yeah. Yeah, and just to follow up on and complete that thought, so we'll present the methodology. What we did not do, which is different than the E-zone project, was to do a site-by-site evaluation. We used the tools that were available to modulate or to modify the base state data around this one particular type of landslide susceptibility. And I'll show you why in some slides when the time comes up. There were some problems. So we had to dial that in using the methodology and then weigh whether we were gaining or losing sites in a way that affected the risk, the actual real life risk. And
Commissioner, I would also add that unlike the E-zone example where you can go to a site and see a natural resource, I don't think landslide works that way. So I definitely would caution us in suggesting that there could be some site-by-site evaluation. I just don't think that's practical or feasible in this instance.
And just to add on to that too, I think we discussed, what the difference was between the two and the ramifications of having a landslide hazard flat on your site is just to do the study. So another alternative we could have is not have a map at all and require a landslide hazard, a geotech report for every property that's going to be doing a land division. And we thought, well, that seems silly to be requiring it on completely flat sites. And unfortunately, I think we have this a little bit of an imperfect tool. We have this map. It's probably okay for 95% of the sites, and of the 5% of the sites where it might, they might be implicated, many of them are probably not going to come to land divisions anyway. So I think that's what our calculus was on that.
does that help?
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing in some testimony is just, that it's, the reality as reflected on the map is different from what the perception is and how to ensure that there's, fairness or a follow-up.
For sure, yeah. And we can talk about those examples in the work session. We'll have a few more examples to work through and show you.
Great. 2 more questions? May I? Okay. They mentioned the school sign-off as David Douglas specific. I'm so curious. I know, I knew you were going to do that. I'm just so curious why David Douglas specific and not other school districts?
Yeah, so there's a policy in the comp plan that talks about coordination with school districts that have an adopted master plan that conforms to state law. If I'm quoting
It's a school's facility plan. And when we were doing the comprehensive plan, we reached out to all the 5 school districts and within the city of Portland boundaries. And the only one that had gone to the state and adopted their facilities plan was David Douglas School District. So during the comp plan at the time, we actually downzone some properties in David Douglas School District. Because of that, PPS and other school districts don't have an approved facilities plan through the state.
Great, thank you. For Edison Street, and Mr. Patterson, thank you very much for joining us in person. It's always a delight to have people come. Was that an LID? It sounds like that was a PBOT. Okay, that was a local improvement.
I would assume, given there's liens involved, but I'm not familiar with the project.
Okay. Okay, it was an LID. Okay, and then the very last, it sounds like your slideshow was critically acclaimed. Where can people find it?
We will make that available on the project website. So
It's also available when you visit the Planning Commission's website. You can access the e-files associated with the meeting.
and you can watch the whole video all over again.
That was, you got some great presentation accolades there, Morgan. That's something to feel really good about there.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Okay, anything else before we continue this item to, is it May 28th?
April 23rd is our work session.
April 23rd, sorry about that, jumping ahead a month.
Well, we do need to, Morgan, I sent you an email with some dates. Do you want to go through those dates? I mean, we would like the commissioners to finish reading the testimony, of course, and then send us comments or, questions or things that they want to cover in the next work session, so we can develop that agenda and meet with the officers about that.
Yeah, and I should also mention we have heard from the Development Services Bureau. They have a couple clarifications they want to consider as well. They're technical, just make the code read a little better, sorts of things. So in terms of the dates, I don't have those dates in front of me, Sandra.
I'm
Like a
going to
deadline?
look for them. Sorry.
I have them if you want them.
Oh, you do? Thank you, Julie. I'm coming at a loss here.
Sure. So April 9th will be the date that we're asking commissioners to let us staff, so Morgan and Sandra, know questions and topics. And then we'll have an officer meeting to discuss that on April 11th, followed by your work session, as we mentioned, on April 23rd.
Thank you.
Yeah, so hopefully that's clear for the commissioners. This is the, I still have questions about this. I'm interested in learning more about that. Or potentially if you have the beginnings of an inkling of an amendment you would want to propose, that's when we would want to know about them. So we can prepare everyone and prepare materials to bring for you for the next time.
Okay, I guess I have one quick question. Does this code project, since I've not read it yet, affect any of the triggers? For example, that a land division over a certain size is the opportunity for PBOT to require a street to go through? Or are any of those triggers part of this project, or is that not touched?
That specific example around connectivity is that there isn't a different trigger, but we've created a standard for when that applies. So it's not tied to site size, it's tied to the condition of the streets around you. But yeah, lots of thresholds for you to review in there. But I guess the other thing I would highlight is, for the most part, the existing criteria we left intact. So the real bulk of the changes are translating those criteria into a set of standards. So in terms of focusing your attention, really pay attention to what those proposed standards are.
And just to remind the commission, the objective was to create a standard that's the same as the criteria, not to increase the requirements in any way. The one exception to that is the tree preservation standard that had all the yellow highlighting on the slide. And that's why Morgan spent so much time on it and showed you what the standard would have been if we kept it just the way it was. But we are proposing to increase that a little bit, and he explained why.
Table and eating.
And then, since our first testifier had provided a written handout, is it possible to have that entered into the written testimony?
Yes,
That would be
that's the,
great.
that's the practice, yeah. we
Thank
would
you.
do that.
Perfect. Okay, well, that we can go ahead and adjourn our meeting. Thank you, everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing you all back in 4 weeks.
Great, thank you.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.